if you could give a quick description of what you do every day, your role, and then talk a little bit about how it intersects with media and technology. Hold the data part for a subsequent question.
Sure, Dave. So I'm the president at Nielsen. Some of you may have heard of Nielsen, some of you may not. We are one of the world's largest B2B information companies. We do two things in broad terms. We measure what people watch, which is a description of measuring media behavior, and we do that in 45 countries. And we measure what they buy, which is a description of measuring purchases predominantly of consumer packaged goods in 110 countries. And in many ways, I'm not going to go into the big data conversation yet, but we may have been the original big data company. I think we were the first private enterprise to buy an IBM mainframe back in the day, in the 50s or whenever it was, very, very early on. And our founder, Arthur Nielsen, basically his first invention was defining a concept called market share for the purposes of research 91 years ago. And his second big invention was media research, quantifying audiences that were listening to radio programs at the time. And we've basically been doing that for 91 years. And there's never been a more exciting time to do it because of the growth in digital technologies, the changes in consumer behavior, and the ability to use data in very interesting ways to do what we do.
Okay, so Natasha, your chance. Hopefully you don't have to cheat on the data question as quickly as Steve did there.
Sure. Well, I'm the head of corporate development and managing counsel for Enterprise Partnerships, which is a team at MasterCard. And this team is trying to develop new relationships, new strategic partnerships outside of our traditional space. So we are moving beyond the financial institutions and merchants and finding new partnerships in order to enhance the consumer experience. So we're creating innovative services, solutions, and opportunities to leverage the new types of innovations in technology, communications, media, in the business-to-business, mobile, and payment space. I think it's interesting, everyone knows what MasterCard is, but they don't necessarily know what we do. But at the heart of it, MasterCard is a technology company. And they're really trying to make payments easier from an end-to-end transaction perspective. So that's really how technology is at the heart of what we do at MasterCard.
Great, thanks. Rick?
I'm Rick McFarland. I am the VP of Data Science for the Hearst Corporation, which is a building just a couple of blocks up the road. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Hearst. A lot of people aren't. But Hearst owns about 29 magazines. You're probably familiar with Cosmo and Elle and Esquire and those. We also own about 32 television stations across the country, 29 newspapers. We also own a plethora of international magazines and a lot of data providing B2B companies like Fitch Ratings. We own 80% share of that, Black Book, and other things. And the theme of all this is really data, because we basically collect data across all these different companies. And they hired me 2.5 years ago to basically be the center point for all of the data across the company and aggregate it and find ways to then repackage it and push it back out through all the different channels. So I'm kind of the dividing rod of data for Hearst.
Great. Big data has become a great sort of lightning rod to try to aggregate a lot of attention about things that have changed in technology and data and software. When someone asks you, what is this big data? I'd like each of you to tell me what you say.
Unlike 10 years ago or 20 years ago, certainly, and perhaps 10 years ago, we all as consumers produce enormous amounts of big data every single day. And some of that goes to Hearst, and some of that goes to MasterCard, and some of it comes to Nielsen, and some of it goes to Simul Media in various different ways. Firstly. Secondly, that does not necessarily mean that big insights can be drawn from big data. I think there is a sort of a view that, well, if we've got data, we can draw blinding insights from it. That is not the case. It takes a tremendous amount of work to take a big data set or many big data sets and turn it into to insights. And then last but not least, it doesn't mean that there's necessarily money to be made, right? And from a commercial standpoint, the use of big data, it's not always a money-making exercise, but it often is. And so I think the first point I would make about big data is just that there are many, many conversations. There aren't a common set of definitions, and there aren't necessarily a common set of understandings as to what it is that we're all talking about.
Big data is really an opportunity for big dialogue. I mean, if we're not having the personal connection, then the data itself is really useless. And it's an opportunity to interact with consumers, find out how we can improve services. It's an opportunity to draw information from different resources and then make the connections, build on where the information is coming from, what can we do with it, and then how can we leverage it to actually improve and enhance people's experiences.
Yeah, I definitely have a definition in my head for big data, which is, I think Nielsen, all the people at Nielsen will agree with me. I think in the past, data has come from one source. It's a survey, or when you study stats in your school, you have one data set that you probably download. But I think what has happened in the current world now is that every device, every object, everything now gives off data. And I think big to me is the sources of data, that we have many, many, many different sources now, and there's not one point of truth anymore. And so big data for my organization or anything in the real world will be, you're going to be challenged with all the different data sources you're going to come up with, and it's the amount of data that you can connect, not the data you collect.
What are the steps that you have to do to help the connections drive insights, or let's say revenue generating insights or business insights?
And my job at Amazon was also, believe it or not, the data connector. They bought companies data sources, and the first thing you do is absorb those data. And so the first thing I did was to establish some governances across the company that would enable the connection. You have to speak the same language across the different data sources. They have to have similar IDs so that things can be joined. And so I established some data governance practices, which is, I think, the key to connecting is you have to actually create that ability to connect.
For all of us, the first question is what question we're trying to answer with the data, right? And so from a Nielsen perspective, we're trying to answer the question, how do US consumers consume media? What are they doing on a minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour, daily basis? What TV programs are they watching? What other videos are they watching? What websites are they consuming? And so for us, the question is across the entire US population. It's not what is Dave Morgan doing or what is Steve Hasker doing. It's what is the US population. And then you break it down and you say, what is the population in the Los Angeles market area doing? And so what we have to do is not just take a big data set that represents one geographic area or one type of consumer, the tech savvy or the ultra wealthy or the student or whatever it might be. We have to represent the whole population. And so we will take multiple data sets and we will use our panels to correct and calibrate them. And we do think that because the panel is recruited as exactly representative of the US population, it's not that big, but it is perfectly representative of the US Census. It's a great means to actually tease out the truth. If you look at the top-rated program in Los Angeles, so what was the program that got the most audience based on Comcast, Dish, DirecTV, or other providers? It is completely different depending on which provider you look at. And so when someone says to us, okay, what were the ratings last night in Los Angeles? If we relied purely on the big data, we'd produce 4 or 5 different results. Somehow we have to sort through that and we have to say, well, that Dish data set is more skewed toward this ethnic group or this set of age groups or this geographic footprint, whereas the Time Warner and Comcast data set is, and so we've got to correct for that. And I think it comes back to what question are we trying to answer? The question we are trying to answer is what is the US population in its entirety doing in terms of media consumption and consumer packaged goods purchased?
Thinking back to my stats class, right? correlation does not necessarily equal causation.
You mean umbrellas don't cause rain? Umbrellas going up, I'm sure they get all the time.
That's a good analogy. Thank you.
So when you're looking
that.
at the data, to your point, just because there are trends, you have to apply additional layers of information and analysis in order to actually draw insights from it and figure out what you can then do with it. So one of the key things that we're trying to tackle, particularly in the enterprise partnerships team, is inefficiencies. We look at inefficiencies in the marketplace, inefficiencies that consumers are facing in everything from urban transportation to traveling. Particularly something that we're looking in the future for is in the urban transportation area. I mean, as people are moving more into the cities.
You think there's something in this Uber company?
Right, and they're a great example. They are completely disruptive. There was a taxi cab system, and everybody muddled along with it, and you accepted that that's how you had to get along, but you couldn't find a taxi cab on a rainy day or on a certain particular street corner because they just weren't available. And now you have an opportunity to work with a company that's doing it better. And that's the point. It's finding those opportunities to do things better.
I'd like to talk a little bit about talent. So Rick, you came from Amazon. I mean, clearly a very data-centric company, and now in Hearst. How do you look for the people you need? Do you learn to find skill sets? I mean, like the government looking for lawyers that might become a programmer. Like, do you find different kinds of thinking?
What I look for is somewhat of a non-traditional student. I think a lot of the universities and schools that I've gone to, or you're going to right now, you pick a career, you pick a degree, and you kind of follow that degree on to its completion, and you stay focused in that field. But I think a data scientist is really a blend of computer science and something, or you're sort of a non-traditional, where they've taken their skills in a certain field of expertise like law or marketing, and they've combined it with computer science. So the talent, when I'm looking through resumes, I'm actually looking for people with a little bit of a diverse background. I'm obviously looking for computer science and mathematics, economics, or statistics. So there's a little bit of math discipline, but I also look for a blend.
Mm-hmm. Natasha?
I would recommend to everyone to have some experience in technology, computer science. I mean, I have an uncle who is an English professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and from what I understand, they're not hiring anyone into the tenure track anymore unless they have a computer science background, at least to be able to do some programming. So in even the most traditional or non-computer science type of roles, it's ever more important and present to have that kind of informational background. Doesn't mean you need to necessarily be a computer science major or expert, but to have some exposure, taking classes, and certainly that diversity of experience is always going to help you.
I think there's a real takeaway here that Rick is on the stage, and he is in a senior executive position at make no mistake, one of the world's leading media entertainment information companies, and he's a data guy. That is a big deal, and I know from the point of view of Rick's board, it's a big deal that he's around. It's a problem for Nielsen. We come out of this world, right? So Arthur Nielsen invented market research, invented media research. We have close to 1,000 we used to call them measurement scientists. We now call them data scientists, right? And these are people who
You got some marketers in there.
I will. Yeah, exactly. I boast about it. These are the world's best statisticians. We have traditionally been a place where great statisticians would come out of graduate school and say, do I continue and teach and do research, or do I go to the Bureau of Census, or do I go to Nielsen? And thankfully, many of them came to Nielsen. So that's where we've started from. But to your question, Dave, we have a real gap and a real opportunity for I think many people, and that is we've got to continue to build measurement scientists who understand how to build a panel that's representative of the US Census and make that as perfect as it can be. But equally importantly, we need people who can do two things. One, understand what problems our clients are trying to solve, so big media companies, big advertisers, and translate that back into how to use data to answer that question. And so we're in competition with you guys and MasterCard and Hearst to get this talent. Whereas I think 5 years ago, if we'd been on this panel, we wouldn't have been in competition. Well, Simon Media wasn't around, right? And we wouldn't have been in competition with Hearst and MasterCard. We are all competing for great data analytics talent. And I think it helps if you've come out of computer science. I don't think it hurts if you come out of English Lit or law, as long as you're able to identify a problem, break it down, and figure out how to use the data. That is a tremendously valuable skill set.
We've now started bringing in graduating high school seniors for full, highly paid summer internships, and plugging them right in, and encouraging. Parents block this sometimes. Maybe after a year or two, they don't want to go to college or keep going to college.
Just 10 years ago at MasterCard, your traditional hire had 15 to 25 years experience in the payments industry, financial institution, very traditional, had maybe been working then at MasterCard for 20 plus years, et cetera. We now have a robust program where we have an intern program for college students. We have a college hire program, and that is only in the last 2 to 3, 4 years. I mean, MasterCard did not hire straight out of college for a very long time, and I think it's a testament to both our CEO and understanding the marketplace that in order to continue to innovate and to be relevant, you need to have diversity of all different types. So, age, where you're coming from around the world. And I think it's really important to have that focus, because when we talk about millennials, for example, they grew up in a different type of environment. So they've had technology at their disposal in a way that people of other generations have not had. And so they interact with technology in a different way. And you need to have that perspective in your company if you want to stay innovative and relevant.
Hearst is 125, 27 years old. We have an established base of people, and I can hire some from the external side, but that's where Amazon, where it was easy to hire. Well, I wouldn't say it was easy. It's easy to find people that want to work for Amazon. It's hard to get them hired because there's a very high test and bar that you have to take to get in. At Hearst, you have an established base of individuals, and I usually take all of the people that are interested in data science, and I put them on a spectrum. And they're either on this far left of a computer scientist or a dev or a software developer who's very strong at computer science, but doesn't really have the analytical knowledge of how to build a regression or how to answer a business question. They're very good at programming. And I also have the other end of the spectrum of a person who's a statistician, fresh out of grad school, who's been working with one data set, but doesn't know how to do open source. They don't know how to do any kind of coding or Python or any kind of scripting. And my job is to really shove them together. So take some people that are really good at the statisticians, I will actually remove from their computer program package list SAS, which is a software package they use. They have to learn how to do it all in Python, and they have to use R if you're familiar with those packages, or do it from scripting languages. On the other side of the spectrum with the programmers, the software engineers, if they want to become a data scientist, it's a little bit more of an educational challenge where you have to send them to conferences or to side schools where they can actually take some stats classes and become more of the business intelligence, I call them a business intelligence engineer spectrum. So really the job to me is shoving people kind of toward the middle and becoming that jack of all trades that I talked about earlier. But I always find people at the poles.
We have what we call Executive Leadership Associate Program, which takes 50 to 100 folks out of college and grad school, puts them in a rotation program over 2 years. So you spend typically some time in New York, some time on the West Coast in one of our offices, some time in the media business, the consumer business, rotating through different roles, working with different people. And then at the end of it, you kind of get to pick, and there's a process by which you pick one of those rotations, or you go do something else as a full-time job. It's really fun. It's been really successful, and we had a conversation which is we need to be more digital. And to the point Natasha made, people who really understand, and are adept with technology. And for a while we were thinking, well, that's folks who just really understand social media and mobile, and that's helpful, but it's data science. I mean, let's cut to the chase. It is people who are comfortable with handling huge amounts of data and disaggregating problems.
Where do you find, and maybe you also fit in this, the translators, the critical people who are good at working between the data scientists and those that are going to own decisions, some of which in creative industries might be talent, some of which are people that don't have those skills but are really good in some other specialty areas?
Someone who has the ability to be flexible and to be interested in multiple types of opportunities. So the way that you can get experience and become a translator if you haven't grown up with either a computer science degree or an analyst degree or gotten that data science background, is by being available and flexible and willing to take on opportunities. So you can gain some of those skill sets through your work experience by introducing yourself, certainly to concepts, Hey, take a computer science class. Learn how to program in Python. I mean, maybe that is a little bit of a stretch for some folks, but these are useful skills that even when you're thinking.
I think things like Code Academy are now making those accessible. It's amazing how many people I'm seeing mid-career are taking those courses. It immediately qualify people right away. Right. They're like, hey, I want to get into this stuff. I know it's hot. Great. Right. Yeah. Are you going to sign up for Code Academy? We'll pay for it.
And even if you're not going to end up being a coder, just having that understanding of how that works is an incredible skill set that then gives you additional talent that you can bring to your own job.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is open this up to some questions.
Hi, my name is Juha Kaunisto. I'm from a startup called Big Tags, my own company. How do you see the privacy issues in this post-Snowden world, where people are more aware of things like cookies and all those? How do you see the challenges in the near future, and how do you plan on kind of conquering those in a large scale?
So, you want to start?
I'll take it.
I love this question.
You should be a privacy lawyer.
This is actually a very great question. So, yes, privacy is a huge issue because when you tie data together, you're basically reconnecting up the customer. And that's when legal starts to get concerned if you have some PII, personally identifiable information in any of your data sources and you're tying that data together. So, and Amazon was very strict about this. And our job was to tie together the Amazon data with set-top box data that is available in several different sources. But how do you do that without sending the data to Amazon, but then we would know all the set-top box people, and Bezos would never let the data leave Amazon. So there are solutions for that is pretty, you can always use a third party. And that's a very popular technique of a double blind, where both data sets are sent to a mutually agreeable on third party that does the join, the merge. And they can actually act as an analytics partner because they don't have the identifiable information that the two parties that are engaged with. And that should be a whole other lecture because that's a very fun and interesting topic.
Hi, my name is Clarion Tung. I'm a PhD student at Columbia University. So it seems like these days data from smartphones and web browsers are very ubiquitous and there's tons of it. And then it seems that correspondingly more analog data, such as from doing surveys, becomes more valuable. So I was wondering, do you have...
Thank you.
Can you use the big data to sort of refine and target the kind of survey questions you ask? Is that something you guys are doing?
Yeah, it is. So, you point to an issue for us, which is when the data comes back from a cell phone or a PC, it's a device. So it just says that device was used to do something, whereas what we're focused on is the individuals. and not the individuals as in, Dave Morgan and his personally, the stuff he's doing, but the individual consumer. And so we've got to use the survey data and the panel data to basically take all this big data from devices and put it back to the individual. So for example, I have an iPhone, I have a smart TV, and I have two PCs, and I have one tablet, right? But I'm one person. And so if you array all the data that's coming from those devices, which we do, and you say, okay, what are these 5 or 6 people doing? You get the wrong answer. So the big thing that we do is we use the survey data to calibrate and correct all these data sets and figure out it's actually one person, it's me, and I'm male, 45 years old, living in New York City. And that data does help us reconfigure the panels. So we figure out where are the holes in our big data sets, and we bolster the panels to build up that information. We have gone back into households who we just used to measure TV using hardware meters, and we've wired up with software meters all of the different devices in the household, right? And to be able to sort of put these things together. So I don't know that we're not all the way there, but we're getting much better about using big data and small data together rather than just having them separate.
One of the things that people don't, on the flip side, I've been telling everybody to start playing with data. I think big data has a curse that if you are actually in a stats class or getting your PhD and you're actually working with big data, it can cause what I call you to be precisely inaccurate. There's a lot of precise inaccuracy going on right now. Because what big data allows us to do is you end up pulling the data from one device for a particular day, and you pull all the data off the data set, and you have a sample of about 1 billion. And you go and do your stats calculations on it, and you calculate a mean or a standard deviation, and essentially you have no variance in the data because it's so huge. And you assume that the answer that you're producing is the correct answer. But what's happening with big data is it's very biased to activity or what's going on that particular moment of the day. And what you're actually producing is what you think is very accurate, but it's off center, but it's very precise. And so I think using survey data or anything else to counterbalance that precise inaccuracy is an important thing that when you actually go in to start analyzing big data, you need to start to consider.
Hi, my name is Rafi. I work with 21st Century Fox. My question's about data ownership. It seems like there's a bit of a land grab in big data right now. Everyone wants to own their data. A lot of companies are very protective of their data, Netflix, Amazon, Google, Facebook. So my question is really, how do you think about ownership of data and who you share that data with and whether you get more out of that data by sharing it with others versus holding it to yourself?
When MasterCard actually receives data, the only data they actually get is your 16-digit card number when you're processing your transaction. So we never see anyone's name or address or any of that personally identifiable information that you might think about. But there is an incredible wealth of data that MasterCard has access to that allows us to see trends, and we use those trends on an anonymous basis in order to then produce results. We have an advisors group that sells these insights. So one of our business models is to take the data and to be able to sell it to others who would need it. So we can help stores figure out, well, not only what are their customers doing actually within their walls, but what are they doing beyond their walls? And again, it's not based on that individual particular customer themselves, but it's based on the trends that we can connect using the data in order to be able to help them then access their customers beyond their own stores.
I'd like to change your question a little bit from who owns the data to who knows the customer. Because I would argue that I think it's going to be very hard to own data in the future. But what I think Google and Apple and some of those companies that you mentioned are very successful at is they actually know for Google you have to log in to every device, right? You have to log in on your phone, you have to log, so they actually can track you. They know you from device to device. Apple, every one of your apps, everything you do, you sign on with your Apple ID, they know you. And I think Hearst struggles with knowing the customer because when I first got there, we kind of have lost the customer because it's very hard to keep track of them. There's no logins, and all these tags that exist on all our web pages basically suck the data out, and the customer is dispersed across the universe. So I think the companies today and the future are going to really struggle to really the game here is to know the customer again. You don't want to own them, you just want to know them. And the ones that can track them everywhere, like from a television to a desktop, would be really cool. But if you can actually follow people from what they watch on TV to what they do on their desktop and their home, that would be really neat.
So I thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.
If you could give a quick description of what you do every day, your role, and then talk a little bit about how it intersects with media and technology. Hold the data part for a subsequent question.
Sure, Dave. So I'm the president at Nielsen. Some of you may have heard of Nielsen, some of you may not. We are one of the world's largest B2B information companies. We do two things in broad terms. We measure what people watch, which is a description of measuring media behavior, and we do that in 45 countries. And we measure what they buy, which is a description of measuring purchases predominantly of consumer packaged goods in 110 countries. And in many ways, I'm not going to go into the big data conversation yet, but we may have been the original big data company. I think we were the first private enterprise to buy an IBM mainframe back in the day, in the 50s or whenever it was, very, very early on. And our founder, Arthur Nielsen, basically his first invention was defining a concept called market share for the purposes of research 91 years ago. And his second big invention was media research, quantifying audiences that were listening to radio programs at the time. And we've basically been doing that for 91 years. And there's never been a more exciting time to do it because of the growth in digital technologies, the changes in consumer behavior, and the ability to use data in very interesting ways to do what we do.
Okay, so Natasha, your chance. Hopefully you don't have to cheat on the data question as quickly as Steve did here.
Sure. Well, I'm the head of corporate development and managing counsel for Enterprise Partnerships, which is a team at MasterCard.
Find ways to then repackage it and push it back out through all the different channels. So I'm kind of the dividing rod of data for Hearst.
Great. Big data has become a great sort of lightning rod to try to aggregate a lot of attention about things that have changed in technology and data and software. When someone asks you, what is this big data? I'd like each of you to tell me what you say.
Unlike 10 years ago or 20 years ago, certainly, and perhaps 10 years ago, we all as consumers produce enormous amounts of big data every single day. And some of that goes to Hearst, and some of that goes to MasterCard, and some of it comes to Nielsen, and some of it goes to Simul Media in various different ways. Firstly. Secondly, that does not necessarily mean that big insights can be drawn from big data. I think there is a sort of a...
I'm Rick McFarland. I am the VP of Data Science for the Hearst Corporation, which is a building just a couple of blocks up the road. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Hearst. A lot of people aren't. But Hearst owns about 29 magazines. You're probably familiar with Cosmo and Elle and Esquire and those. We also own about 32 television stations across the country, 29 newspapers. We also own a plethora of international magazines and a lot of data providing B2B companies like Fitch Ratings. We own 80% share of that, Black Book, and other things. And the theme of all this is really data, because we basically collect data across all these different companies. And they hired me 2.5 years ago to basically be the center point for all of the data across the company and aggregate it.
And this team is trying to develop new relationships, new strategic partnerships outside of our traditional space. So we are moving beyond the financial institutions and merchants and finding new partnerships in order to enhance the consumer experience. So we're creating innovative services, solutions, and opportunities to leverage the new types of innovations in technology, communications, media, in the business-to-business, mobile, and payment space. I think it's interesting, everyone knows what MasterCard is, but they don't necessarily know what we do. But at the heart of it, MasterCard is a technology company. And they're really trying to make payments easier from an end-to-end transaction perspective. So that's really how technology is at the heart of what we do at MasterCard.
Great, thanks. Rick?